Let's return to events in the Middle East now and get some reaction to Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, who in the past hour or so has been holding a news conference in Egypt. I'm joined now by spokesperson for the Israeli Prime Minister's office, Tal Heinrich. Welcome to you. Thank you very much for being with us. Antony Blinken said that when it comes to a ceasefire hostage deal, he said that gaps are narrowing. Would you agree with that?
Well, you see, there won't be any permanent ceasefire. What we agreed to in the past is a humanitarian process in the fighting in exchange for the release of hostages. We stood by it back in November. That was the deal that we had in place, the deal that Hamas later on violated, and then fighting has resumed, and we still stand by it today. But so far in the negotiations to release hostages, the demands that Hamas have presented were delusional. As the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has called them. At some point, Secretary of State Antony Blinken himself called them non-starters. But nevertheless, we will continue to fight for the release of our stolen people in Gaza while we continue to exert heavy military pressure on Hamas, because we know that that's the only thing that works against them, and continue to pursue the diplomatic avenue behind the scenes.
When you talk about diplomacy, we understand that negotiators from Israel, which include the leader of Mossad, are heading to Doha tomorrow. What does that tell us about any movements when it comes to a deal being reached, do you think?
So the nature and the terms are not something that I can discuss with you, Samantha, on
air.
Are
you hopeful, though? Are you feeling more positive than you have done perhaps in the past few months that you are nearing some kind of agreement to see the return of those hostages?
It's not something that I can confirm at the moment. Once we have something to announce, of course, we'll announce it. What we know is that our stolen people have been held hostage for more than 160 days. We keep hearing horrendous accounts from hostages who came back. We know that the ones who are still being held in the Hamas terror dungeons are going through a living hell. Same goes for their families. They're being deprived of sleep, of sunlight, of medical care. We know that some of our young female hostages there are being sexually abused, and we know that for a fact. They must come back home. There's no question about it.
Antony Blinken said when it comes to the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza, he said Israel needs to get more aid in. Do you agree?
Well, we want to see aid reaching the civilians of Gaza. We said it from the very beginning, and in fact, we facilitated the entry of more than 330,000 tons of humanitarian aid, of food and water, medical equipment, all of that into the Gaza Strip since the beginning of the war. We facilitated it we've gone to unprecedented lengths to provide relief to the civilians in Gaza. And just to remind you, we're talking about an enemy zone that still holds our stolen people there, our hostages, an enemy zone that celebrates every terrorist attack against us by handing out candies and calling for our destruction.
Your critics obviously say that you're not doing enough, hence the airdropping of aid in, which we're looking at now, hence having to bring aid in via the sea. I want to talk to you about the operation going on at the Al-Shifa compound at the moment. Israeli forces say they've killed, 50 Palestinian gunmen. They say in that fighting around the hospital, combat's raged there for days, hasn't it? Hamas authorities accuse the army of having killed dozens of displaced people, patients and medical staff. We know that the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, say they're operating there trying to prevent harm to patients, staff and equipment. We spoke to a doctor a little earlier today on BBC News who's worked with Palestinian healthcare since the 1980s. He says it's a lie that the government and IDF prevent harm to patients and healthcare equipment. He said it's a repeated pattern of attacks, and he quoted the latest WHO report who said the IDF has carried out hundreds of attacks on healthcare facilities in Gaza since the October the 7th Hamas attacks. How do you respond to that?
Well, Samantha, you know, hospitals are indeed supposed to be protected under the laws of armed warfare, but Hamas has zero regards to armed warfare, nor do they care about Palestinian civilians, because they openly say that they wish to sacrifice the civilians of Gaza for their sick goal of obliterating the one Jewish state in the world. You know, this is why they systematically and methodically use hospitals for their war machine. For Hamas, a hospital is just another terror facility. An ambulance could be used to drive around terrorists as as so to say, as a taxi. I can tell you that our forces have discovered in almost every hospital in Gaza, that includes the Shifa hospital, Rantisi hospital, the Indonesian hospital, the Turkish hospital, and so forth. They've discovered Hamas operatives, Palestinian Islamic Jihad operatives, loads of ammunition and terror infrastructure. We don't go inside hospitals just because. We go in while safeguarding the civilians and patients inside, to which Hamas has no regard, because it's an operational necessity. They use hospitals as their command centers. That's unacceptable. And the UK and the United States honestly should know it better than anyone else, because Hamas are not the first terrorists to use these methods.
Tal Heinrich, thank you for your time. Stay with us here on BBC News.